Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, whether you're in the UK, whether you're in Australia, whether you're in Canada or America, whether you're in South Africa, whatever part of the world you're in, loads of love to each and every one of you, and especially all my subscribers, because we're a very special bunch. But love to each and every one of you, and I do hope you're doing remarkably well. I'm doing fabulously, thank you very much, and all the better for spending some quality time with you. Don't forget to get that quintessential perfect drink, whatever it is you drink, from Earl Grey tea to a lovely cold ice beer. Whatever it is, go and get it, because I've got a fabulous story for you tonight. So before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell and the thumbs up. And let's get started with tonight's story. Dear Sarah and all your lovely listeners, I stood silently outside the abandoned, dingy, gloomy Queen Anne-style home, assimilating it all, as if I was drinking a flavoured milkshake, but regretfully this one did not taste good at all, for the bitterness on my tongue was very poignant. This piteous grey-blue house with red accents had a menacing asymmetrical facade and dominant front-facing cable, along with overhanging rounded eaves, a polygonal tower, and a porch that covered the front facade. I felt as if this house was staring back at me, with invisible, foreboding, predatory eyes, for indeed if houses had personalities, this house did not have one at all. It seemed that charm had evaded and eluded it, giving it a wide, distant girth, and avoiding it like a contagious, deadly disease you did not want to contract. Yet this patronising house had an inflated, haughty ego, standing proud and tall with a snobbish, misguided sense of arrogance, self-importance and contempt. It seemed to consider itself to be superior, loftier and far more grandiose than other houses of its generation. Yet in truth it was in denial and repudiation, for this once impressive house appeared to be dressed in rags, like a bedraggled beggar on the street corner, wearing scant, threadbare clothing, or the emperor who wore no clothes, falsely believing he was dressed in resplendent finery, when in fact he was wearing nothing at all. For not to put too fine a point on it, this house was quite literally falling apart. It was dilapidated and in ruins. Then there were the unfortunates who had lived inside her suffocating, overbearing, uncongenial walls, and had long since fled from her, as though the very sight of her made them nauseous and sick to the stomach. Then there were the rumours, too many of them to count, and of course all the idle speculation, and the respective strangers who claimed to have heard disembodied voices, women screaming, and random gunshots, along with others who claimed to have been viciously assaulted by the unseen hands of an unfriendly demoniacal male spirit. It would seem many believed that loitering in this mansion during the pitch darkness of the twilight hours were the deceased spirits of former residents of this once affluent, sumptuous and extravagant abode that had made Raven Hall their home. Cold shivers went down my spine as I eyed the crumbling, decaying, decrepit mansion very warily. It really wasn't a pretty sight to behold. Truly it looked like a cantankerous, angry man that wanted to be left well alone. Who would have ever been desirous or even remotely enthused to live in a place as cold, austere and stony-hearted as Raven Hall, even during those former days when it was in tip-top condition? You only had to glance at the place to feel that something about it wasn't right at all, even for a maverick like myself. I discerned even the double-hung windows with their highly flamboyant decorative trim, some boasting stained glass in shades of red, blue and green, looked rickety and unstable, and were covered in thick layers of dust that clung to the house like a congealed grease. Then I noticed the ugly vines that stretched out their grotesque tentacles, that rambled untidily across the walls with an insatiable, ravenous hunger, as if they wanted to take over the entire house with their green bounty, and secure the shaking foundations with their thick, treacherous stems. What had I got myself into, I wondered? Why on earth had I agreed to do this nonsensical thing? I reflected over the evening when my friends had teased me mercilessly for my dismissive attitude towards anything paranormal. What was wrong with being an eternal cynic, or a lone wolf for that matter, in regards to my opinions? Someone that was a questioner that needed evidence to believe in anything outer-worldly. It was wise to be a skeptical and to challenge things that could not be explained, because I was certain that they probably could. It was easy to believe a ghost was floating up the stairs when perhaps it was just some loose plumbing banging against the eaves of the house, or even a rat scuttling around in the roof. If that wasn't bad enough, my friends not only believed in ghosts, but in cryptid creatures like Bigfoot and the skinwalker. Now, I don't wish to be nasty or unkind, but the skinwalker, please! And as for Bigfoot, my guess is possibly a human hoaxer that was wearing a monkey suit that he hired from Universal Studios. Or the creature that you saw standing on its haunches that scared you half to death, that you willfully mistook for Bigfoot, was possibly just a bear. Much as I loved my friends, I certainly thought that they were misled and influenced by popular culture, believing what they wanted to believe, rather than basing it on any sound evidence and genuine proof. I was not without guilt, for relentlessly I had mocked them for their fictitious beliefs. Although I didn't want to be unkind or mean-spirited, it would seem that my manner had been somewhat abrasive and had provoked them all, including my wife, who certainly could not abide my cynicism and nonconformist attitude. She was desirous to shatter my delusions like a mirror into millions of tiny shards, for I had unintentionally reduced them to challenging my revolutionary belief system, or lack of belief, so to speak. "So, you don't believe in haunted houses, Richard?" scoffed Martin, one of our friends. "Well, then, why don't you go and stay at the old McCarthy residence? Raven Hall, I believe its name is. We bet you won't be able to last the whole night there, because it's haunted. Mr. McCarthy hasn't sold Raven Hall yet, but he has a caretaker who looks after the grounds. He can let you stay in the house for a whole night. Are you willing to do it for us?" "Why would I want to stay in a house that is reputed to being haunted?" I had piped. "Of what point would there be in that?" "Well," chuckled my wife, who of course sided with all our friends on this occasion, "if you really don't believe in ghosts, why would you be at all adverse to staying in a haunted residence overnight? Why would it bother you at all, if you have absolutely nothing to fear?" "It would bother me because I don't want to stay in a large abandoned house all on my own." "Of what purpose would it possibly serve? It's not a spurious ghost encounter that would creep me out, but I wouldn't enjoy the solitude and loneliness of the place." "Good grief," said my friend Oliver. "You can do better than that, surely. Nice try, though, Richard. But sorry, it's a lame, pathetic excuse that is completely invalid. If you don't believe in ghosts, then prove it. Humour us. Stay at the residence overnight, and then tell us that you don't believe in the supernatural realm after your overnight stay at the hall. I tell you what, if you feel so lonely, I'll call Gareth, my friend, to join you. He's a doubting Thomas like you. You're both like two peas in a pod. You can stay overnight at the residence. Go on, be a sport. You know you want to, really." "Very well," I said, "if it makes you happy, and to appease you, as I'll never hear the end of it if I don't. I'll do it as long as I have company." And then they all cheered with delight. What had I got into, I thought, holding my backpack and plastic bag of takeaway food in my hand? Where was my companion for the night? And what about the caretaker? Everything seemed ominously quiet, and I certainly hoped it would stay that way, as then I would have the quintessential excuse to abandon this crazy experiment. Just as I was pondering upon these very thoughts, I could hear a lone car purring in the distance, driving down the long, smooth driveway that was surrounded by electric green countryside and clusters of very alluring red maple, oak and spruce trees that banded together to create vast areas of natural forest with open hiking trails that surrounded the left side of the home, where there was a distant backdrop of rugged outcrops in interesting shapes and rolling hills so typical of the bluegrass state. Finally, the car rolled up the driveway and did a very graceful U-turn, parking directly next to my car in a meticulous, perfect straight line. It was ironic. We both had exactly the same cars, 2 black BMW 5 Series parked side by side. I watched as the stranger climbed out of his BMW, glancing briefly at mine, with a somewhat bewildered expression upon his face. I guessed he was thinking the very same thoughts that I'd been. I was astonished to see the stranger bore an uncanny resemblance to myself. We even dressed alike. Perhaps the sceptic individual is one of a unique breed, much like a rare blood type with much in common. We were both of similar age, mid-30s, about 5'6", lean athletic body types, with heads of full curly black hair, and an olive complexion that could get darker once exposed to too much sun. Some people falsely mistook me as being from Italian descent, and I'm sure this gentleman now approaching me had similar problems, and was regularly confused for being Mediterranean. But nothing was further from the truth, well, certainly for me, and I imagine for him too. I was a full-bodied, hot-blooded American through and through. Well, I like to think so anyway. I was exceedingly proud of my American heritage. "Hello," said the man, coming up to me, shaking my hand warmly. I liked him already, for his handshake was firm. "You must be Richard," he piped. "You and I have been well and truly typecast for our free-thinking spirits," he joked. He stopped shortly for the moment, regarding the house, and I could sense by his reaction he was feeling it too. "Don't like the house at all," he said, looking at me dubiously. "I don't believe in ghosts, but if they did exist, this would be the quintessential home for them to reside. The place certainly gives me the creeps. My skin is crawling. Something about this place bothers me. I can't pinpoint it exactly what it is, but it's an unsettling, disquieting feeling." "Have you actually seen the caretaker yet?" he asked me. "Not yet," I said. "We have to wait for him to let us into the house. I'm secretly hoping he won't turn up, so we won't have to do this ridiculous experiment. And what for, anyway? Just to reaffirm to our friends that we still don't believe in ghosts. They are hell-bent on changing our minds. And come hell or high water, it's not going to happen." "Oh, I agree with you," chuckled Gareth, giving me the high five. "Even if I were to see a ghost, supposing they did exist, I'd never give them the satisfaction of saying you were right and I was wrong. I can just imagine the satisfied smirks on their faces and the delighted yelps. 'We told you so!' "I know exactly what you mean," I said. "I can already envisage the smug expressions on their faces, especially that infuriating wife of mine. And it's not going to pan out as they'd hoped anyway. Ha ha ha." For a while we stood perfectly still, almost motionless, surveying the house that held our immediate attention like a witch's magic spell. For as the ominous darkness swept over the valley, it was almost as if Raven Hall had become cloaked in a baleful, threatening, ethereal, inky blackness. I noticed that the adjacent towering oak trees very close to the house appeared to morph into tall, dark, menacing giants that swayed softly in the breeze. Their moving, shadowy branches appeared like ugly tentacles, only adding to the direful impression that enveloped the house in an inauspicious, portentous aura. Something wasn't right about Raven Hall, but much like Gareth, I couldn't put my finger on exactly what it was that ultimately had confounded me. Then we saw him approaching us, and my heart sank. It was the caretaker. He was a man in his late 60s, with a full head of grey hair. and a magnificent matching beard. I wish I could grow one like that, I thought secretly. "Good evening, gentlemen," he said, approaching us and looking at us with curious, concerned brown eyes. In his hands he was jangling a large bunch of keys and unconsciously selecting one decorative key for the very purposes of opening the front door. "You rarely want to stay at Raven Hall?" he asked us, scrutinising our expressions carefully, as if searching for any signs of reluctance or hesitancy on our faces. "You don't have to do this, you know," he said. "It's not a question of wanting to do it," I said. "It's more a question of proving something to our friends. It's all about making a point." "So you're cynics," said the man, chuckling. "Ha, ha! You won't be for very long, once you've spent a night at Raven Hall, I assure you. If you make a whole night of it, of course, without running away. You do know about the history of the home?" "No," I said, shrugging my shoulders. "Maybe you should enlighten us, because Raven Hall had certainly served to elevate my curiosity." "Well, in the 1900s, Raven Hall belonged to a man called Mr. Herbert Montgomery. He was a man of great means, not a good character, for he had a heart of stone and an eye for a beautiful woman. He married a very fair maiden called Charlotte, who came from an impoverished background, and he paid the family handsomely, if they would of course allow their daughter to marry him. Mr. Herbert Montgomery was abusive and controlling and impetuous towards poor Charlotte. He locked her away here at Raven Hall, as she wanted to escape from his cold-blooded clutches, but he didn't want to lose her under any circumstances. Charlotte's two brothers sensed she was in trouble. They came to her rescue, as they hadn't heard from her for a long time, and had misgivings about Mr. Montgomery's dishonourable and pernicious reputation. They planned to steal Charlotte away from the property and return her to the safety of her home. Regretfully, they were caught at Raven Hall by the two vicious guard dogs on duty, who gave the game away. Charlotte's brothers were caught red-handed, trying to rescue their sister. They were shot dead on the premises by Mr. Montgomery, who claimed it was an accident. Of course, he got away with it. Charlotte was so heartbroken by the demise of her beloved brothers, and became increasingly desperate to escape her violent oppressor, even if it meant paying the ultimate sacrifice and losing her life. She was very depressed at the time, as you can imagine, so she jumped to her death from one of the high windows here. I'm not sure which one it actually was, and frankly I'm glad I don't know. I gather Mr. Montgomery was so devastated about Charlotte's death that he shot himself in the head. He claimed he couldn't live without his love, for he loved her in a warped kind of way. Now it's believed you can hear gunshots in the mansion, and that men are chased off the premises, as Mr. Montgomery is still trapping Charlotte in the residence. Many claim to have heard the sounds of a woman's dreadful sobs. It's a very sad story, I admitted. Perhaps that's why the house has such a contemptible energy. Do you know why the previous owner vacated the property? Asked Gareth curiously. Well, I gather it was the ghost of old Mr. Montgomery that made their lives a living hell, causing all kinds of pandemonium at Raven Hall. He spied on the young woman like a peeping Tom, because he was renowned for being immoral in his life. But we learnt the male homeowners were physically and violently attacked in the mansion. And you, I asked, do you believe in ghosts? Call me Jim, said the man. Put it this way, he said jovially. I wouldn't want to step foot into that mansion to find out, but I'm more than willing to open up Raven Hall for you. But I'm not the one that plans to stay the night here. Good luck. I think you're going to need it, skeptic or not. Lead the way, I said, and we followed him into the house and watched him place the key in the lock and vigorously turn it until it creaked open. We thanked the caretaker and cautiously entered Raven Hall. It was steeped in a pitch-black darkness, made a lot worse by the fact that it was no longer connected to the electric power grid. I opened my backpack and pulled out a couple of head torches, handing one to Gareth, who put it on gratefully. I've also brought along an oil lamp, he told me. We can use that too. As we entered the house, we were surprised to see that it was fully furnished, with ripped once opulent curtains framing the windows that had seen better days, while dust sheets covered the ornate, elegant furnishings, and the fancy wallpapered walls were now peeling, and the once glamorous polished floorboards creaked as you walked, and were warped in places from damp, and appeared to be riddled with holes. If that wasn't enough, even the chandeliers had seen better days, as broken string crystals lay across the floor. And then there were the spider webs absolutely everywhere, some the largest webs that I've ever seen, that were like wheels with spokes, their sticky silken fibres hanging from furnishings, across doors and walls. If that wasn't bad enough, the carcasses of dead roaches were seen absolutely everywhere. It was not pleasant at all. We made our way to the main bedroom suite and climbed up the gloomy staircase that creaked and groaned under our weight as we ascended on each step. We pulled back the heavy dusty cover of the king-sized bed, both deciding that our sleeping bags would be placed side by side on the mattress that was surprisingly still quite comfortable. A small blessing, I suppose. My mouth felt dry and parched from the dust floating in the air that occasionally caused me to sneeze. "Bless you," said Gareth sympathetically. "I think let's stay here in the bedroom suite and get this all over and done with to appease our friends. I don't know about you, but this place is too spooky to explore. And let's face it, the mansion is in such bad shape, it's a safety hazard. I'd rather stay put in one place, and at least this bedroom suite is devoid of mildew and rust, and the floor is in better shape than the other rooms in the house, which is an added bonus." I watched him as he lit up the oil lamp and pulled away the coverings of the side table to use as a stand, and it certainly made a huge difference to be able to see more clearly in the dusky darkness. "Let's have something to eat," I said, opening up my bags of supplies that included a wide selection of sandwiches, cold chicken pieces, potatoes, salad and coleslaw, along with bottles of old-fashioned fizzy lemonade that I'd brought along with me, and, of course, a bottle of cold white wine that certainly served to take the edge of staying the night in such an oppressive, foreboding, inauspicious place like Raven Hall. It was about 12 o'clock when we retired to our sleeping bags, and before long I had drifted off into a sleep. Certainly the wine had helped. I awoke to find myself being shaken vigorously by Gareth, whose eyes were as round as saucers, and he looked terribly afraid. For someone who was more than a little scathing about the paranormal, he looked very discomposed and apprehensive, which was disturbing. "What's wrong, bro?" I asked. "Listen," he said. "Can you hear that?" I realised he was trembling violently and wobbling like a jelly, so I listened intently, and then I heard it. It was an indisputable sound. I could hear the sobbing of a woman. And it wasn't a disembodied sound at all. It sounded like a woman in the house was crying in distress. "Someone's in the house," I whispered. "It must be a woman. Let's go and find her. I think she may have got in the house from the open front door. She's clearly in some kind of trouble. I think she needs our help." Gareth looked at me warily. "I'm not sure that's a good idea. I didn't say anything to you, but I was awoken to the sound of gunshots earlier, and I nearly woke you then. How you slept through that commotion, I don't know, as the sound was ear-piercingly loud." "Well, I am a deep sleeper," I confessed. "Don't you see," said Gareth, "it's exactly the sequence of events the caretaker warned us about." "There has to be a practical explanation for everything," I said, looking bewildered. All of a sudden we could hear the clumping sound of metal-toed boots thumping up the staircase and moving directly towards our bedroom suite. We watched in horror as the half-ajar door of our bedroom creaked open very slowly, causing the hair on the back of my neck to stand up and my heart to almost miss a beat. The door was now wide open, and there was no breeze to have caused the strange anomalous event to occur, nor any rational explanation whatsoever. The footsteps had stopped for a moment, but I sensed something and noticed that the temperature in the room dropped considerably and became icy cold, and now I was shivering with a measure of fear and great trepidation, and from the coldness that enveloped me like a blanket of ice, I was terrified. What the heck was going on? I truly wondered if we'd been set up by our friends, but then again, I wasn't too sure about that. Was something or someone standing in the doorway, I wondered? I certainly had the impression that there was, but I tried desperately to focus my eyes on the area, and even with the full light of the oil lamp still on, I could see nothing standing there. Yet I sensed a very ominous presence, and it felt as if someone very menacing and hostile was staring at us, almost like we were being stalked by an invisible predator. I perceived on a subconscious level that they weren't happy with our presence in this home. I briefly glanced at Gareth, and his eyes were focused on the doorway, and he was trembling in terror. I could smell the faint odour of a pungent cigar smoke and hear the feet walking towards the edge of the bed, and then the invisible eyes leering at us with a hatred that was unfathomable. And I felt a strange tickle in my ear, and a disembodied whisper screaming, "Get out! Get out of my house!" in an enraged, deep, raspy voice of a man. And then I felt something pushing me violently, hard, with a forceful pressure to ensure that I did move. I knew it wasn't Gareth, and it was all I could do to hurl myself down that staircase and get the hell out of Raven Hall, with Gareth screaming at the top of his lungs behind me, "Run! Run! It's following us!" Neither of us had our car keys with us, and I glanced briefly over my shoulder to see this dark, spectral form running behind us that was the shape of a man, but black with no features, and I was consumed with absolute terror. We ran through those woods on a dark night where the light of the moon was not generous, and it was exceedingly difficult to see ahead of us, most especially as we sprinted up the hiking trail that could potentially trip us up with treefall and unsuspecting rocks, but we didn't care. Then I remembered our headlamps that we were still wearing, even as we slept. "Switch your headlamp on!" I screamed out. It was so much better to be able to see ahead of us as we ran, but we could hear the heavy boots behind us, and then something grabbed hold of Gareth, and whatever it was, I saw nothing standing there, but Gareth was being beaten up by an unseen entity, and he was screaming and crying out in agony. I could see the effect of every punch, but nothing was there. It was terrifying to watch. Then the most extraordinary thing happened. I could hear something hefty thundering through the trees and bolting towards us. I became petrified, so much so that I wet my pants. Then I saw it, and in the light of my torch I could barely believe it. I was observing a Bigfoot, and I nearly passed out from shock, for this was not a man in an ape suit hired from Universal Studios having a laugh at our expense, nor was it one of my friends intentionally trying to prank us. No, this was the real deal. This creature towered at 10 foot tall, and was easily 4 feet wide across the shoulder area, and 1,000 pounds. I would describe him more like a wild man rather than an ape, but he was covered in hair that looked to be of a jet black colour. But the muscle definition on this critter boggled my mind, as it was built like an army tank, made of dense, tight muscle, and yet he had the typical overlong arms and the pyramid-shaped head so often described in Bigfoot accounts, but the face on this thing was exceedingly human. Yet I did not smell the disgusting sulphurous compounds on the creature so often talked about, for he smelt as pleasant as the earth. The creature stopped as he observed the invisible struggle going on, but it was as if he could see what we were unable to detect, which was nothing short of astonishing. Perhaps the Bigfoot had extrasensory abilities, for it certainly seemed so. He let out the most horrifying roar that caused the ground to shake and vibrate, and he growled directly at the invisible entity, and appeared to be punching it into the fresh air, with his overlong arms, even though we saw and observed nothing at all. But it appeared to be having a result. We heard the strange whooshing sound, and suddenly we saw this light orb floating away from us down a hiking trail back towards Raven Hall, and this invisible entity just vanished and disappeared from our sight. Gareth was no longer being attacked by this spectral being, which I am now convinced was Mr. Montgomery himself. The Bigfoot gestured for us to remain seated on the ground, and he made a few grunts, and like a centurion, he watched over us until the first light of the morning, and then he nodded at us and simply glided away. I sensed the Bigfoot creature had been protective towards us, but evasive and naturally reticent by nature. I assure you, even entering the house to retrieve our things was a scary business, but we hightailed it out of the house as fast as we could, with all our gear. We both speeded down the driveway at one hell of a speed, both agreeing to go to the local diner for breakfast together to discuss the previous night's events. A slim blonde waitress took our orders, and I questioned Gareth about our strange experience. "Do you still not believe in ghosts?" I asked. "Well, I have to now, don't I?" said Gareth, pulling up his shirt to show me all the hand marks and punches over his body that had now formed blue and black bruises, and clearly depicted very discernible finger marks. I could feel the ghostly entity of a man pounding me and beating me, and even the weight of him on me, but I couldn't see a thing. It was a weird experience, almost like I was being beaten up by fresh air, he told me. "I think it must have been Mr. Montgomery, still guarding over Charlotte. I imagine we posed a potential threat," I said. "After all, he was a slime ball, and we are exceedingly good-looking." "And what about that Bigfoot?" piped Gareth. "He was the real deal. You could see that he could see beyond the veil. How's that possible? I'm in no doubt about that. And he chose to protect us from that wicked entity. That was for sure. I mean, who would have imagined that Bigfoot was real? Frankly, I feel ashamed for ridiculing people in the past about it. I must say I am astounded. I can't get my head around it. Nothing, for that matter. Everything seems nonsensical to me. I can't believe that there really is a supernatural realm. It's really going to have to make me consider my faith." I began to cut at my bacon vigorously. "You're not going to say anything to your friends, are you?" I asked. "You're not going to give them the satisfaction of knowing that we were attacked by a ghost and saved by Bigfoot?" "Are you kidding?" laughed Gareth. "I'd never live it down." "My lips are sealed," he said, making that zipped motion across his lips. "I'll tell them nothing happened in that house, and there are no such things as ghosts. I don't want to dull my shining reputation as an ardent skeptic, do I?" We both high-fived each other in agreement, for I couldn't bear the idea of eating humble pie. That would be awful. And have all my friends gloat over me with a told-you-so expression on their faces. So when I returned home, I promptly told them that there were no such things as ghosts, and my night spent at Raven Hall was very inactive, and they all were disappointed and astonished, but they never challenged me again. But then again, when subjects like Bigfoot or ghosts were discussed, even the skinwalker was mentioned, I never said a thing. Maybe silence revealed my secret, as words were never spoken. So there you are. That's my story. Wow, that was a fabulous story. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Until next time, goodbye and good night.